Hi, y'all. You know what time it is. Ah! Wow, sorry. You know what time it is. It's story time with Chris. Get into it. Yes. So I've introduced you all who don't know on my Facebook to this book. I've mentioned it before. It's the 101 African American Read Aloud Stories. And I got this when I was very, very young. And as I always say, I don't own the music that is playing in the background, which is John Coltrane's My Favorite Things album. Love jazz music. Anybody that knows me knows that I love music as a whole, but I absolutely, absolutely enjoy jazz. The next best thing that I is another favorite genre of mine would probably be city pop or classical music. And that's classical music from all over the world, from all different cultures and whatnot. But jazz will always be a staple for me. And jazz comes from the black community and has always been rooted in the black community. A couple of people I can think of besides John Coltrane, um, Dizzy Gillespie, Sarah Vaughan, Eartha Kitt, Louis Armstrong, Lena Horne, Count Basie and his orchestra, which we have to do a video on Count Basie. He doesn't get enough credit. Um, just a lot of amazing stuff. Jazz is just an incredibly Miles Davis. Jazz is an incredibly influential genre of music because you can put it to any type of situation, be it sad, happy, glad, mad, frustrated, running late, taking your time, being depressed, or feeling elated. And jazz is just so integral, and we have to give credit where credit is due. Without the black pioneers that came before to put out the foundations for jazz music, we would not have it in the plethora of which we do now. Um, it's just it's very sad when I hear people believing that jazz is more so a quote unquote white person's music, which is not true. Jazz has always been deeply rooted in black culture and has skyrocketed a lot of our black celebrities to the top. And Cab Calloway, Fats Waller, just so many talented people that paved the way for me to even go to a performing arts high school and to be a performer and to have such a passion for theater. I have to give credit to them. And before we begin our reading, which is going to be a bit of a two-parter, because we're going to be reading two different people today, I want to give credit where credit is due as a black, gay, gay non-binary person. Um, I have to give credit where it's due, and I want to bring up two particular people of interest that have always been incredibly inspiring and affluential to my life. Would be Marsha P. Johnson and James Baldwin. And if you know James Baldwin, you more than likely, for those who don't know James Baldwin and his um, influence in the huge contributions to the civil rights movement, being an incredible orator and being able to write a lot of great books and plays and poems. Giovanni's Room, Uncle Tom's Children, um, Beale Street, like just so many good narratives that were told from this man. And he was a gay black influencer. He was a gay black writer and orator and was incredibly well spoken and incredibly poignant with the points he was making to white America about what it's like to live as a black individual in America in the 1950s and 60s and so on. And a lot of times I feel as though people don't really address James Baldwin's sexuality as more, and they more so dismiss it. But why I bring that up is that he was an individual that was unapologetically himself and was very much so, yes, I am this, but I am also still a part of this community. Marsha P. Johnson was a trans woman of color who was the first person to throw the first stone during the Stonewall riots and was incredibly influential in the um, many, many nights of them barring the bar from the police. The Stonewall Inn was a beautiful, it still is a beautiful bar in New York in Greenwich Village, where a lot of the LGBT youth of the city could go congregate and be in peace. It was run by the mob. It was funded by the mob, so they could have like a quote unquote safe space to be themselves. And Marsha was just incredibly outspoken and was just someone who was a force to be reckoned with and had dealt with a lot of job losses and discrimination and being carted off to the police for being trans because it was very much so very criminal at that time to be trans, especially a trans woman of color. And Marsha, without her and a lot of the trans women of color and the drag queens and black and brown kids of color that were part of the LGBT and the lesbians and whatnot, the gay liberation front would not have been possible. It would not have been able to be as fervent and as strong as it was in 1969 in June when the first stone was thrown to tell the world, like, we're not going to take it anymore. We're not going to take this discrimination. We're not going to take this harassment. We should be allowed to be ourselves and not have to make excuses for anybody. And that's how I feel. As long as you're not harming anyone, as long as you're not doing anything to persecute others in a harmful way, you should be able to live your life to the fullest without fear of discrimination, without fear of persecution. And it's taken me a lifetime to get comfortable in my own skin, but I have to thank the people that came before me because I'm not just black, I'm also gay, and these are things that there are issues integral to me that are incredibly prevalent and important in my life. And I'm not gonna say what I thought I was gonna say. I, like others in my community, deserve respect, and the black LGBT definitely deserves respect more so than it has gotten over the years. And we will definitely have a discussion and a book where we will talk about Marsha P. Johnson, James Baldwin, along with other black LGBT civil rights leaders and contributors. Because often than not, they are more so glossed over because of their sexuality. And, or they are not even discussed upon in the black community because of that. And it's very dismissive. And I want to get rid of that narrative. I feel like we've made a lot of progress since then, but there's a lot of work to be done. The battle was won, but the war is not over. So, on that note, we're going to go with our first reading. As we were talking about the arts and music, we're going to talk about Alvin Ailey. Alvin Ailey was born in Rogers, Texas on January 5th, 1931, and grew up in Navasota, Texas, where he regularly attended church with his mother. His memories of stomping his feet, clapping his hands, and singing along with the church choir inspired the rhymes and dances he created for the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater. So, we are going to be reading two different excerpts. So, this is from 1949-1953, Lester Horton's Dance School. More than anything, Alvin wanted to study dance. But when Alvin arrived in Los Angeles, not everyone could take dance lessons. In 1949, not many dance schools accepted black students, and almost none taught the fluid moves that Alvin liked so much. Almost none but the Lester Horton Dance Theater School, a modern dance school that welcomed students of all races. Lester's door was open to anyone serious about learning to dance, and at age 18, Alvin Ailey was serious, especially when he saw how Lester's dancers moved. One student, Carmen de Lavalade, danced with a butterfly's grace. Another, James Truitt, made modern dance look easy. But Lester worked his students hard. Sometimes they danced all day. After hours in the studio, droplets of sweat dotted Alvin's forehead. He tingled inside, ready to try Lester's steps once more. At first, Alvin kept time to Lester's beat and followed Lester's moves. Then Alvin's own rhythm took over and he started creating his own steps. Alvin's tempo worked from his belly to his elbows, then oozed through his thighs and feet. Alvin danced at Lester Horton's school almost every day. He taught the other students his special moves. In 1950, Alvin joined Lester Horton's dance company. Soon, Alvin performed his own choreography for small audiences, who gathered at Lester's studio. Alvin's dances told stories. He flung his arms and shim-shammed his middle to express jubilation. His dips and slides could even show anger and pain. Modern dance let Alvin's imagination whirl. All the while, Lester watched Alvin grow into a strong dancer and choreographer. Lester told Alvin to study and learn as much as he could about dance. He encouraged Alvin to use his memories and his African-American heritage to make dances that were unforgettable. "What is he doing?" one student asked. "Whatever he's doing, he's sure doing it fine," two dancers agreed. Some tried to follow Alvin's moves, but even Alvin didn't know which way his body would reel him next. Alvin's steps flowed from one to another. His loops and spins just came to him the way daydreams do. 1958, 1960. Blue Suite, Revelations. Alvin's satchel hung heavy on his shoulder. His shoes rapped a beat on the sidewalk while taxicabs honked their horns. He was glad to be in New York City, where he came to learn ballet from Carol Shook and modern dance techniques from Martha Graham, two of the best teachers in the world. Alvin took dance classes all over town, and he met dancers who showed him moves he had never seen before. So many dancers were black. Like Alvin, their dreams soared higher than New York's tallest skyscrapers. Alvin gathered some of the dancers he'd seen in classes around the city. He chose the men and women who had just the right moves to dance his choreography. Alvin told them he wanted to start a modern dance company that would dance to blues and gospel music, the heritage of African American people. 9 dancers believed in Alvin's idea. This was the beginning of the Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater. On March 30th, 1958, on an old wooden stage at the 92 Street Y, Alvin and his friends premiered with Blue Suite. Dances set in a honky-tonk dance hall. Stage lights cast moody shadows against the glimmer of each dancer's skin. The women flaunt red-hot dresses with shoes and stockings to match. The men wore black hats slouched low on their heads. They danced to the swanky swank of a jazz rhapsody. Alvin Ailey's choreography depicted the blues, that weepy sadness all folks feel now and then. Blue Suite stirred every soul in the room. Alvin was on his way to making it big. Word spread quickly about him and his dancers. Newspapers hailed Alvin. Radio announced his debut. An even bigger thrill came when the 92 Street Y asked Alvin to perform again. He knew that they hardly ever invited dance companies to come back. Alvin was eager to show off his work. On January 31st, 1960, gospel harmonies filled the concert hall at the 92 Street Y. Rock, 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 rock of my soul, oh, rock of my soul. Alvin clapped in time to the music, the same way he did when he was a boy. But now Alvin rejoiced on stage in Revelations, a suite of dances he created to celebrate the traditions of True Vine Baptist Church in Navasota, Texas. The audiences swayed in their seats as Alvin and his company gloried in their dances. High-stepping ladies appeared on stage, sweeping their skirts. They danced with grace and haughty attitudes. Alvin and the other men jumped lively to the rhythm, strutting and dipping in sassy reveille. Revelations honored the heart and the dignity of black people, while showing that hope and joy are for everyone. With his slick moves, Alvin shared his experiences and his dreams in a way no dancer had ever done. When Revelations ended, the audience went wild with applause. They stopped and shouted, "More!" they yelled, "More!" Taking a bow, Alvin let out a breath. He raised his eye toward heaven, satisfied and proud. Ooh. Felt a sneeze coming on. Hit it. Excuse me. Ooh. I am just not having a good day with this camera. My apologies, y'all. All right. The next person we're going to be going over is Arthur Ashe. For all of my sports enthusiasts out there, you would more than likely know who this is, but for those who don't, Arthur Ashe, the first male African American to play professional tennis, won 33 championship titles during his tennis career. In addition to his success on the court, he was also a teacher, author, and activist, always reaching out to those in need and providing inspiration to all who knew him. Arthur Ashe was one of two children of Arthur Ashe Sr. and Mattie Cordell Cunningham Ashe. He was born on July 10, 1943, in Richmond, Virginia, the capital of the Confederate States of America during the Civil War of 1861 through 1865. Oh, excuse me. Richmond is a handsome city halfway between the Atlantic Ocean and the Appalachian Mountains. Today, it has a population of more than, well, this number has definitely changed, so we're not even going to mention it. Much of the area was burned during the Civil War, but recovered quickly because of the tobacco industry. Although it is just over 100 miles south of Washington, D.C., the Richmond, where Arthur grew up, was a very segregated and very southern community. African Americans in the 1940s were not allowed to sit in the front half of Richmond's public buses. They attended separate schools. There were separate drinking fountains and restrooms and houses of worship and public parks for blacks and for whites. The races played sports separately, sat in different parts of movie theaters, and ate in different sections of restaurants. Perhaps most important, they had very different views of history. Longtime white residents of Richmond were proud of their battlefield memories of their Southern heritage. Many blacks knew little or nothing of their own history. Their ancestors had been prevented from learning to read or write, taking the stories of their lives with them to the grave. Yet Arthur Ashe and his family were fortunate. Large, close, and inquisitive, they traced their roots back more than 300 years to an African woman who survived the frightful voyage from the continent of her birth to Virginia on board an 80-ton English ship known as the Dodington. A West African, as were most slaves, the young woman was known only by a number until she was purchased by a man named Blackwell. She took the name of Blackwell and married a slave with that name. They had a daughter, Lucy, according to Virginia records. She was the first African-American member of Arthur Ashe's family tree. Several generations later, a person on the Blackwell side of the family married a South Carolina native who bore the name of Ashe from an early governor of North Carolina. The Ashes had a son, Arthur, who married and became the tennis star's father. How could the Ashe family know this? Fortunately, an aunt still keeps a huge family tree painted on canvas with the names of dozens of family members. Each is represented by a single leaf. The tree stands 6 by 7 feet and was put together through years of careful research in old and musty courthouses along the East Coast. In the middle of the tree is a family crest showing a chain with a broken link. The broken chain symbolizes freedom for the slaves. Tennis star Arthur Ashe is the only person among 1,500 family members whose leaf is painted in gleaming gold. Arthur suddenly did not seem destined for stardom. On July 10, 1943, he was a small, thin baby, and his lean appearance would stay with him all of his days. He remembered himself as a child with ears that stuck out and legs so skinny that friends and relatives believed that he had some sort of disease. Mattie Ashe, Arthur's mother, died shortly before his 7th birthday. Her death occurred at the pitifully young age of 27 and was caused by a stroke brought on by a problem pregnancy and complicated by a weak heart. She had been ill for some time. Arthur later realized they had often envisioned her in a blue corduroy dressing gown. Arthur Sr. broke the news of his wife's death tearfully to Arthur and his younger brother, Jody, as the three sat on the lower bunk in the boys' bedroom. "Don't cry, Daddy," Arthur told his father. "As long as we have each other, we'll be all right." The young boy's words were prophetic. His father kept a close eye on Arthur and Jody, and the two boys would do well in school and elsewhere. Young Arthur's father was not educated or wealthy, but one of the jobs he held in the city was an important one. He maintained the parks where African Americans were permitted to play. Part of his job was to keep tennis courts in those parks in good playing condition. Shortly after his mother's death, Arthur stood beside one of the courts one morning watching Ron Charity, Richmond's best African American tennis player. Charity was practicing his high hard serves. He could feel the eyes of the thin, silent boy who lived in the only house in leafy 18-acre Brookfield playground. Charity stopped practicing long enough to approach young Arthur and asked, "Would you like to learn how to play?" Arthur said he would. As casually as that, my life was transformed, Arthur would later remember. Arthur Sr. felt his son was too thin for football and other contact sports, and he made him take naps long after other children stayed up all day. He was relieved to see the boy learn the rules of tennis as he swatted madly at the bouncing balls. Young Arthur loved the game and showed real ability. A couple of years later, in 1953, the 10-year-old would pose for a newspaper photo amid a number of trophies. But these were trophies won mostly at Brookfield Playground, not at the larger and better-equipped whites-only private clubs. Except for an occasional white player who wandered into his local court, Arthur was unable to compete against most of the good players in Richmond. Many people in and outside his family helped young Arthur with his game, but none did more for him than a former college athlete who took up tennis to stay in shape. Robert Walter Johnson was a rugged man, a baseball player, and a college football player in the days when no helmets were worn. He attended several African-American colleges after World War I, eventually earning a medical degree. Johnson settled into his practice in Lynchburg, Virginia, where he spent some time looking for a sport he could play the rest of his life. A thoughtful man, Johnson tried basketball and several other sports before picking up a tennis racket. He stuck with tennis because it was not an easy thing for him to master. But master it he did, playing at the local black YMCA and analyzing the games of white players at parks or at private clubs. Johnson thought enough of tennis to enter and win important African-American tournaments and pay for the construction of a court in his backyard. Johnson decided to organize young African-American tennis players. He wanted to help local boys enter the United States Lawn Tennis Association's National High School Tournament held nearby each year. The first two boys he entered were overwhelmed by more experienced white players. Was it true what some tennis publications said, that African Americans lacked the subtle touch required to be great players? Johnson did not believe so. He spent a large sum of money to make his backyard facility an all-weather, enclosed court, and he invited more boys to stay at his home each summer to learn his favorite game. Living and practicing with Johnson was no picnic. He forced his players to control their emotions on the court. No one was allowed to raise his voice, throw his racket, or otherwise draw attention to himself. Off the court, he set the children to work, raking his yard, maintaining the court, cleaning the dog kennel, making their beds, and more. They were taught which foods were good for them, they learned table manners, and they were told how to act when a lady or an adult entered the room. Johnson's goal, he said, was for the players to be accepted without being a center of attraction. He knew white people would more readily allow black players on tennis courts if they behaved. Each year in the early 1950s, boys under Johnson's care would enter the big high school tournament. Each year they would be beaten, though they were no longer humiliated by their lack of ability. Meanwhile, in 1953, Ron Charity called Dr. Johnson, a recent college graduate and a ranked player in a National African American Tennis Association. Charity told the doctor that he had been teaching a boy for a couple of years who showed promise. Though small, 10-year-old Arthur Ashe seemed to care a great deal about the game, and Charity wanted someone else who was a good judge to see him play. History is a good thing, y'all. It teaches us about where we've come from and how much further we have to go. And it teaches us not to repeat the mistakes that we did before to each other. We have to be better to each other. We have to love on each other. Even the people who get on our nerves and say crazy things to us, love those people. Because they need it. They really do. And I hope you enjoyed our reading tonight. I will be seeing you tomorrow night for our next Black History Month reading. Peace, love, and hair grease, y'all. I'll see y'all later.